What is the act of being a ventriloquist called, Kyle? Is it ventriloquism? Who cares? Is another question, right? DarbyCast, Wildcard Friday. Kyle and I, we were just talking about rare talents. Ventriloquism technically falls under that umbrella. You got to be a pretty lonely kid to get into that, though. Does anybody get into ventriloquism as an adult? There's so many other activities that you could lean into, but you make the choice, I'm going to buy a creepy doll and just start talking to him and try to move my face as little as possible. So different. Incredibly different from anybody that I know. And if you're listening to this right now and you're practicing ventriloquism or studying ventriloquology, is that Kyle? How am I doing on that? If you're leaning into that, take a time out. Don't stop altogether, but I want to encourage you to take a time out and step back and say, is this me? You look at yourself in the mirror and you say, is this me? And you say it in a full volume kind of way. You use your whole mouth. You don't ventriloquize to yourself in the mirror and be like, is this me? We all need to stop and pause sometimes, is kind of what I'm trying to say. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. And I'm guilty of it too, right? I'm not necessarily trying to give people ventriloquisms. What's a good ventriloquist performance called? And what's the goal? Kyle, please use your computer right now. Can you not see that I'm struggling with this? This is why you're here, is it not? But what's the end goal of a ventriloquist? Could be to connect with others. And there are so many more straightforward ways to do that. But we also want to respect thinking outside the box as well. So how do we reconcile those two things? Doing something that works and is straightforward versus thinking outside the box. You've got to test new things from time to time is the main takeaway. But if you're into being a ventriloquist, Kyle, I swear, dude, if you don't start helping immediately, this whole episode's just going to capsize. We are like adventurers on the Amazon River in a rickety canoe made out of ventriloquy. Fuck, dude. Like, Kyle, start paddling is what I'm saying as a metaphor. But where am I going with all this? The modern world is tough to deal with, and sometimes you develop ideas that aren't okay. For example, you become a ventriloquist because you want to connect with others. You take an experimental medicine because you're told by the establishment that you get a free milkshake or fries or something. You take Ozempic because you want to be thin and trim. How are people getting duped into a medical disaster like Ozempic so quickly after the worst medical fumbling disaster in world history? The old COVID vaxxeruski and how that was handled. People seem to have just forgotten about all that and said, I'm ready to roll the dice again with Big Pharma. Inject me with this thing. No long-term studies on this being used as a recreational weight loss. Whodunit? I'm just going to go for it. That's how a lot of people, I would imagine, approach being a ventriloquist. Is it sounds really good on the surface, but then you get into it and you're like, this is going to kill me. You get into it fully. You've been doing it for about a year. And then one day you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, I think I have cancer. My body's deteriorating. So is my spirit. Big parallels between Ozempic and ventriloquism. A lot of people in this world of ours are talking about the negative effects of Ozempic. Some people are hip to it, but not many people are likening it to being a ventriloquy artist. And I think that's what people come to the DarbyCast for, which is marrying seemingly unrelated concepts in a way that is so dynamic and on point that it almost just makes you want to barf. Now there's a weight loss solution. Anybody who's thinking about taking Ozempic, why don't you just get a full weekly dose of the DarbyCast? You start barfing from all the positive ideas, and then all of a sudden people are like, so what's your process like? What's your routine like? Maybe you tell them, maybe you don't. Maybe you just keep the secret to yourself. Now let's take a pause here. We're all tempted to discuss being a mime, but we want to stay on topic of ventriloquism. Kyle, thank you for pulling up some resources on the screen. Finally, better late than never, right? So ventriloquism is an act of stagecraft in which a ventriloquist, speaks in such a way that it looks like their voice is coming from a different location, usually through a puppet known as a dummy. When in a lot of ways, the person practicing this whole thing is the biggest dummy of all. But the act of ventriloquism is ventriloquizing. Kyle, I think I was right about that. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? But let's go back to the origins of ventriloquism. Why is this even coming up today? A lot of you are wondering. And to that, I say, well, why not? There's a lot going on in this world of ours, but today I want to talk about ventriloquism and Ozempic and make those things so strongly intertwined and related that people are going to wonder how they ever thought about one subject without mentioning the other. We are looking for a paradigmatic shift in the way that people approach obscure hobbies and recreational medicine, or simply looking for fast tracks to success. Maybe that's the takeaway, right? You get into ventriloquism because you think, I'm going to make it as a stage performer, people are going to love me, and you think everything's going to be sunshine, butterflies, rainbows, and Laffy Taffy for me in my life from here on out. Much how people are looking at Ozempic and they're saying, well, I'm just going to inject this experimental medicine and give it a go, and then life's going to be on easy mode. That's not how anything works, right? But let's go back to the roots of ventriloquism. Kyle, thank you again for putting this up on the screen. So the name comes from Latin, to speak from the stomach, venter and loqui. Venter meaning belly and loqui meaning speak. And the Greeks called this gastromancy, which means stomach magic. So concerning, right? Like if you didn't think ventriloquism was startling on the first go around, now you hear it called stomach magic, and you just want to pause and say, I think the devil has a big enough stranglehold on our society that we don't need stomach magic entering the fray. Totally fair to say that. In fact, if you weren't thinking about that, if you didn't have some kind of internal resistance to Greek stomach magic, this podcast probably isn't for you. If you're somebody who celebrates Greek stomach magic, get out immediately, if not sooner. Just either pause the podcast or crash your car or whatever it takes, but you are not welcome here anymore. But this has been going on since the mid-1700s in England. And I'm not entirely certain of the whole history of ventriloquism, but there's probably been times when it's been more popular, other times when it's been less popular. It's just kind of trends in, trends out. Not unlike weight loss trends come and go. Do you remember Anna Nicole Smith, Kyle? She promoted Trim Spa, and she looked good. Trim Spa started sales in 2001. Sales jumped to $43 million in 2004. And Trim Spa's key ingredients were ephedra and caffeine. Anna Nicole Smith took a lot of this, and she was fat, okay? But then she became skinny and hot. And there were commercials that said, Trim Spa, baby. And a lot of people were led down the easy path, thinking there was just a quick fix for making themselves feel good about themselves and the modern world and the way things were going. Trim Spa started in 2001. And what else happened in 2001, Kyle? 9/11. People were looking for answers. Some people found Trim Spa, other people found ventriloquism. Other people found different activities. Hopscotch, tetherball, collecting Hot Wheels. I think that's how a lot of kids were maybe coping. Can you imagine being an adult and after 9/11, you're like, I got to start collecting Hot Wheels? And there had to have been a couple of them, right? Hot Wheels collectors that started after 9/11, and they just said, well, I can't control much, but at least I can control my miniaturized hot rod collection and send them in a loop-de-loop track. It works for a while until it doesn't. And then all of a sudden, your house is full of these cars and you're slipping on them. Starts off real great. And people probably looked at this slot car guy. Let's just call him Dick Kevin. It's like D apostrophe Kevin, black guy. And people probably thought, wow, Dick Kevin is so resilient. He's bouncing back from this 9/11 thing in a way that we didn't even think was possible. Dick Kevin builds momentum, but he goes past the point of no return. He goes past the point of it just being a hobby and turning into a lifestyle. And then an addiction forms, right? It's an emotional social feedback loop where people are praising you. You get used to it and you think, oh, maybe I'll just ratchet this up. Dick Kevin fell prey to that. Hot Wheels Dick Kevin. I hope they're not naming kids Dick Kevin or La Kevin or Trey Kevin. And it's not for any other reason than I think the name Kevin by itself sucks. Don't do that to anybody. Don't put Kevin in a guy's name. But look at Ozempic. People probably start losing weight pretty quick. And then they get that social feedback. People say, wow, you're looking great. You're looking amazing. You're so sexy. And so you keep pushing it. And then all of a sudden you're dead. Happened to Anna Nicole Smith with Trim Spa. And we'd all be hard pressed to imagine that a ventriloquist wouldn't experience that same kind of feedback loop. Tragedy strikes. Could be anything. Could be personal. Could be societal. But let's imagine in the year 2023, somebody decides to pick up being a ventriloquist. They start doing shows at their local library, which I think we can all appreciate. Better to do that than to be a tranny and read to kids and try to be like, hey, so like, you want to link up after this? After the show? Hopefully parents are shutting that down, but I know there's a lot of parents who aren't. They're like, get in the van, Timmy, get in the van. Don't be a bigot. Get in Daffodil Thunderstrike's minivan already. Don't be rude. But yeah, a ventriloquist probably isn't doing that. The non-binary folks, boy, are they. And boy, have they been concerning with their violence recently. More non-binary mass shootings than anybody's comfortable with. But I don't want to get too off topic of ventriloquists, because that's what this episode's really about. So maybe you had this guy or lady. That's even more depressing, a lady ventriloquist. Because, like, you don't even have to be impressive as a woman for people to like you at all. You just kind of show up places and you laugh at people's jokes and you say nice things to people. And that's about as far as you got to take it. Some gals go farther than that. They're very smart, very talented, good at ideas and other things. But imagine being a chick who got into ventriloquism, ventriloquography, mapping out the history of ventriloquism, Kyle. Boy, is this a scattered episode. Check that. No, it's not. It's really on point, and we get it. But let's go back to Trim Spa and talk about ephedra and caffeine. Dangerous combo. Lures you in. But there are no free lunches in this life of ours. But I get it. There's all these seductive things. We can get addicted to caffeine. I don't even really know what ephedra is. Sounds expensive, both in the price and the cost, because Anna Nicole Smith died. Look her up today if you got a couple moments. Look up some before and after pics. But think about being a ventriloquist. Now let's pivot back to ventriloquism. Are you keeping pace right now? You should be. But if you're not, don't be too hard on yourself. Because we move at a rapid clip on this show occasionally. When we're really in the zone like we are now, we bounce around topics, but we always focus on a central theme, which is not just ventriloquism, but the idea that you get into something and then it's like, what am I doing? But then you're in too deep. We see it everywhere. Joe Biden, somebody told him, hey, you should try being the president. Look at how that's turned out. At first, a lot of people were rooting for him, but then people are like, you're so old and like half brain dead. What are we doing? That's probably how a lot of people feel in terms of ventriloquists. You tolerate them at first. When a ventriloquist comes up to you and says, could I do maybe a 15-minute set for you at your kid's birthday? Or maybe your birthday? You, an adult? Maybe you humor that person. Maybe you say, I'd love that. But little did you realize is you are creating a monster. Which is what we've done with Joe Biden, is what we're doing with the Ozempic people too. If you get pulled down the wrong path and then all of a sudden you receive social validation for it, very tough to veer off that path. Look at the COVID vaccine. A lot of people took that thinking that it would make life great and that they'd be a winner. Then all of a sudden, everybody's celebrating in some circles. Certainly not ours, but in some circles, people are high-fiving. They're like, did you get vaxxed? Did you get boosted? Where are we good people? Social feedback loop. Then all of a sudden, now you've got people getting quadruple, quintuple, sextuple boosted, and now they have AIDS. Or something that is kind of AIDS adjacent. What's a key takeaway from this? Be careful. Be careful. And take time out from time to time to really reassess. If you get wrapped up in an activity, a substance, or like a political secular death cult like liberalism, I think it's important that you pump the brakes from time to time and you look around and you say, is this even remotely okay? That's another one of those stand in front of the mirror conversations where you look at yourself, you don't make silly voices in your ventriloquist voice, you put your creepy wooden hand puppet aside and say, I don't know if gastromancy is for me. I don't know if stomach magic is my ultimate purpose in life. I love that. We all love that. When ventriloquists have that moment of self-reflection, or when an Ozempic person takes a pause and says, is this the right thing to do? The answer's obviously not. It's going to create more problems than it is going to create solutions. And maybe you don't care. Maybe you're just suffering from terminal depression and you're like, well, I'm going to be thin and attractive before I die, but that'll be, what a relief. That's pretty dark. That's pretty dark. And maybe that's how some people in the ventriloquist community have been feeling for years. They're like, well, I'm going to be a fucking goof. Total goofball. Until I die of a fentanyl overdose behind a Long John Silver's. So dark. We need interventions. What do we, as people who are great, super high integrity, good at sports, and connecting with others, what's our role in all this? Recognition. 100% it's recognition. If you see somebody saying, I'm going to become a mime, huge red flag. Huge red flag. If you see somebody shopping for wooden hand dolls made in Tibet, you're going to want to have a conversation with that person and say, can we just like go to church or maybe just get a cup of coffee and kind of try to figure this out? Don't go down this path. You don't have to do this. Because we know where it ends up. Somebody who wants to get their 18th booster It's a cry for help. It's a total cry for help. Somebody who wants to get injected with Ozempic, one of the biggest cries for help I've ever heard. But that's when you take somebody and you say, let's go get just a water. I'm not going to get some overly sugary coffee. I know you're struggling with weight management, but I want to connect with you and then I want to help you. It's not easy to confront people when you see them going down dark paths, though. Let's make no mistake about it. Like, let's go back to 9/11 Hot Wheels to Kevin. You know how tough that must have been? For his friends and family to say, like, we loved you before this Hot Wheels collection started. We love you now and we're going to love you afterwards, but we just don't think that this is essential to your identity. You're so much more than this. Look, Kevin, how refreshing would that feel? And let's just rest here for a second and say, there's nothing wrong with Hot Wheels. They're really cool cars. They can be. But we, as leaders, heroes, and winners, we need to recognize the signs of people who are really struggling. It's clear as day for most of us. When somebody says, I'm going to go get boosted, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, I'm going to get Ozempic, I'm going to throw soup on a painting to protest the global temperature, these are all telltale signs of somebody whose life is in complete disarray. And not to make the assertion that my life is totally together or your life, right? This isn't about that. You're not doing this to claim identity as somebody who stops people from collecting Hot Wheels and throwing soup on priceless pieces of art. Although that's not a bad thing to be known for, that's a little too self-focused, and we want to steer away from that. We're doing this not for ourselves, we're doing this for the other people. Tough conversations. Imagine you have to sit down with a female ventriloquist named Erica. And she's like really pretty and she's got a good family, but she's totally lost her way. She's just looking for a way to feel good about herself. So she flew to Norway and she got a custom ventriloquist doll and she named it Harrison Ford. And she's never even heard of Harrison Ford. She just came up with that name independently of the actor. That's pretty weird, right? But it wouldn't be easy to have that conversation with Erica. It definitely wouldn't. Oh, and what does that look like? First, you got to say, Erica, could we have a private conversation? Can you just leave Harrison Ford in this room? I'd like to talk to you maybe in the parlor or the foyer. Erica comes from a wealthy family that has a property that has parlors and foyer. Proving what, Kyle? That this affects anybody. Ventriloquism, mimery, street magic, being a champion of open borders. I don't care what it is. It's all concerning to me. Being an Ozempic enthusiast, or maybe finding ephedra on the internet and saying, I'm going to pour it in my coffee and make some homemade trim spa. It's all in the same lane. It's all in the same zip code, Kyle. And it doesn't matter who you are. It can affect anyone. Erica comes from intergenerational wealth, never has to work a day in her life. That presents a set of challenges. And she's saying, who am I if I don't have to work? And then some scoundrel on CNN or something says a news report, ventriloquism's in. And moral and righteous people are into ventriloquism. Erica is highly impressionable, highly isolated. And all of a sudden she's like, well, I'm going to go to Norway, get this custom doll, and everything's going to fall into place for me. She starts putting on a couple shows. And she's actually getting pretty good at gastromancy, stomach magic, throwing her voice. But then it becomes her whole world. It becomes her whole identity. And it's like, that's not who God designed you to be, Erica. He designed you to be a friend, a family member, a feminine woman, a mother, a hero, a leader. Don't let ventriloquism take up your whole life and your whole identity. Don't let the pursuit of being a climate activist, a climate alarmist, a climate retard. Don't let that define who you are. Before 9/11, I bet you LeKevin had a lot of interests. And I want to say something right now. Maybe it wasn't LeKevin's fault that he got into Hot Wheels. Maybe MSNBC used some underhanded propaganda techniques and said, Islamic terror is on the rise, but let's pivot and talk about the coolest Hot Wheels collection ever. LeKevin was scared. DeKevin? What are we deciding on, Kyle? Is it LeKevin or DeKevin? Either way, great guy. Big heart. He just gets swept up in the nonsense. That's what happens when people are in a heightened state of fear, is they make choices to self-soothe that are not good calls in the long term, not sustainable, not going to bring you closer to people. How are you going to get closer to other people if Ozempic kills you? Sure, they might like you in the beginning. They might say, wow, you're really attractive and fun to be around as a result thereof. I hope people aren't saying that, but maybe there are people that shallow in our world, Kyle. But it just feels good. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, maybe I'll just quadruple my dose. And then you're dead. Intervention strategies, not easy. Not easy at all. Especially when somebody's really down the rabbit hole and they're getting so much social praise for whatever activity or ideology that they're supporting. Because look at DeKevin. All of a sudden, he's not just a Hot Wheels enthusiast. He's a Hot Wheels promoter. And he's getting other people off track. Now, let me just make a clarifying point. I don't have a fundamental issue with somebody doing ventriloquism. I take issue when that eclipses the rest of their identity. When it starts interfering with their relationships. If you can manage a ventriloquism habit and do it by the books, keep everything above board, I want to celebrate that. But most of us can't. I know I couldn't, Kyle. I'm all in on whatever I do. And so that's why I need to be judicious about the activities that I pursue. And we all do, but it's a team sport. That's a huge takeaway from this. And we need to check in with one another. Ask good questions and say, so this ventriloquism thing, how far do you think you're going to take it? Is your dad proud of you? That's a great question to ask somebody. Really rocks them to their core. Hey, you think your dad's proud of you? That's a tough conversation to have with wealthy ventriloquist woman, Erica. That's going to devastate her because her dad's been out of the picture. Businessman. He works in software as a service, SaaS, and he's good at it too. Really good at building a sound team to bring dynamic solutions to market quickly. But that doesn't leave enough time for him to focus on the stuff that really matters, which is family. 1-800-BIG-OUCH.com, Kyle. That hurts. What's the antidote to the nonsense of the world? It's just caring for other people and allowing yourself to be cared for as well. If somebody's giving you pushback on your ventriloquist habits, listen to them. Just give them the time of day. I hope this episode makes it out to the global ventriloquist community and the Ozempic people as well. Those two groups are the most important. But I have mentioned a lot of separate groups that really need some touch points. They're in these crazy echo chambers that aren't even on people's radar, right? Everybody assumes that echo chambers are political when a lot of echo chambers are activity driven. The TikTok FYP is all ventriloquist stuff. Up your game and do better voices. It's just like Frank Caliendo every other video. He's like, here's how to do a Harrison Ford voice. Erica hears that and she's like, who's that? So many problems in this world of ours, but this one's not even getting any attention, Kyle. Maybe we just need to extend license to other people to say, Well, this doesn't have to be your whole thing. This can be a part of who you are. Maybe you can sort of care about Ukraine, but take the bumper sticker off your car. We don't put other countries' flags on our stuff. We don't. We just don't. If you notice somebody dropping a lot of weight really quick and it comes to light that they're using Ozempic, tell them that they're disgusting. Because we got to stop that positive feedback loop. They're probably getting a lot of praise from the people around them. And people are saying, wow, you're really doing great. But you got to be the counterbalance to that, just so they can pause and get stabilized. And you say, you're disgusting. And they're not. They haven't been, they aren't now, and they won't be in the future. But you just need to rattle their cage and reset. Look, Kevin probably needed to hear from somebody, Hot Wheels are stupid. You're an adult. Only one of those things are actually true. He's an adult, but Hot Wheels aren't stupid. But for an adult, they can be stupid if you take it too far. At the end of the day, we care about people. As DarbyCast doctors, you feel it in your bones. You're thinking about somebody right now. Maybe you're thinking about yourself. Maybe you're saying, why did I ever get into unicycle customization? You're not even riding them. But during COVID, some news story came up and you were in a heightened state of fear and uncertainty. And then all of a sudden there was a unicycle convention that was highlighted in a news story following something that was very alarming. COVID's going to kill everybody forever. And you're like, oh no. But first, let's talk about this unicycle convention. Boom, all of a sudden you just gravitate towards that. Check out this unicycle ventriloquist troupe out of Eugene, Oregon. There's new chapters popping up all across the Pacific Northwest, and then somebody's totally ideologically captured. It's how they do it. You're in a fear state, and you just want to gravitate towards something that makes you feel good or normal, and then you're down the garden path, and all of a sudden, you're not even riding unicycles. You're just doing tune-up jobs, and you're putting rims on somebody's unicycle. You say, hey, I'll put spinners on that for the right price. Meanwhile, these people are never stopping themselves to say, what has my life become? It's fair for us to take a pause from time to time and say, whoa, boy, that got a little out of hand, didn't it? Here's the big question. What person in your life do you know that might need a little bit of coaching? They might need that intervention strategy of saying, this is disgusting, or this is super weird, it's off-putting, you're gross. No. And that's not to hurt them. It's to wound them and get them to step back and say, I never wanted to be a unicycle tune-up guy who did ventriloquism and threw soup on the Mona Lisa and voted for Joe Biden and take a bunch of experimental medicine and then stopped exercising because my health deteriorated. And then I said, I'm going to take some Ozempic and slim down. We're looking at what some people in the industry might call a total disaster of a person if we're fully considering the person that I just painted a picture of whom I just painted a picture. Excuse me, and my grammar, Kyle. We need to land the plane, Kyle, on this episode. Check in with people. See how they're doing. If they're taking Ozempic, stop them. If they're telling you about how democracy's in jeopardy, tell them it's not real in the first place. If they're trying to tell you that anybody who's conservative in their values is carrying water for the Kremlin, you just got to slap them and say, what does that even mean? Carrying water for the Kremlin. You're probably going to save that person's life. Because anybody who would say something like that, and believe it or not, there are a lot of people in this world of ours, mainly on the internet, mainly on Twitter, X, who say, you're carrying water for the Kremlin. And they've made that their entire identity as being somebody who calls other people out on whether or not they're carrying water for the Kremlin. You're an instrument of Putin. What? They made it their entire identity. They're really struggling to take a step back and enjoy just being themselves and being with other people and not having to have their ideology or their activities define them. That's the big takeaway from this episode, is that you're perfect in a lot of ways. Not like totally perfect. I don't want to be that naive. But you're pretty amazing before you even perform anything, or before you start talking and telling me how amazing you think Janet Yellen is. She's not, by the way. Before you start grandstanding to me and telling me your thoughts on abortion, just know that I think you're a pretty special person to begin with, even if I don't agree with you. And I just want to disarm the things that have been presented to you as identity pieces in these very confusing and tumultuous times. Appropriate to take a step back and focus on the foundational pieces. Before you're a ventriloquist, you're a person. You're a member of a family. And I could go on. I could take it real spiritual. But you know what I'm saying. But I think that's going to wrap it up, Kyle. Boy, did we just bounce all over the place, but in a positive way, like a bouncy ball made out of good ideas and truth. But Kyle, I think that's the whole episode. Share this with somebody today and say, if you want to hear the ravings of somebody who's really on point, I got your back. That's a great intro that you send in a text message when you're sending this episode link to somebody. Say, are you ready for somebody who's feverishly on point and really cares about you? Especially if the person to whom you're sending this is a ventriloquist or a mime or a magician or an interpretive dance person. That makes all the more sense to send it to them. But have a great rest of your day. You're great.